listeners, and welcome to the third program in our series, Let's Learn Computer Studies, which is produced for grade 8 learners and anybody else who has an interest in the subject. My name is Jandre Nitschke, and today we'll learn about the Central Processing Unit. Please have a pen and notebook ready so that you can make notes of the important points. The CPU is like the brains of the computer. Every instruction, no matter how simple, has to go through the CPU. At the end of this program, you should be able to describe the Central Processing Unit, Control Unit, Arithmetic Logic Unit, Memory, Processors, Types, and the clock speed.
You know what, Frida? My brother was asking me to help with his homework about the Central Processing Unit, and I could not help him at all.
Isn't that today's topic in our computer studies class? Just pay attention in class and ask questions.
True. Then let me write down the question that I have to ask Miss Eliasser.
Good morning, class. Monica, please sit down. What's the matter?
Sorry, Miss Eliasser. I have a question related to what we are going to learn now. My brother just got a homework about Central Processing Unit, and I could not explain to him what it is.
Thank you, Monica. All right, class. That's a good way to introduce our discussion for today, which is the Central Processing Unit. Yesterday, when we defined a computer as the electronic machine that carries out 4 basic operations, such as input, output, processing, and storage, we also say that data is input in the computer by a keyboard or other input devices. Data is output by a monitor, printer, or other output devices. And processing happens in the Central Processing Unit. And finally, data is stored in the internal hard drive or external hard drive. Today we are focusing more on the processing of data inside the CPU. What are the components of a CPU and its functions? Those are the 2 questions we'll answer in today's lesson.
I know that the CPU is the brain of the computer, and everything we do on the computer has to go through the CPU.
Meaning that if the CPU is faulty, the computer will not function properly?
Yes, Monica. All the instructions, no matter how simple, has to go through the CPU. We define the CPU of a computer as a piece of hardware that carries out the instructions of a computer program. Every instruction is repeated as a set of 4 basic operations called the machine cycle, which are fetching, decoding, executing, and storing.
Miss Eliasser, can you explain more on the 4 basic operations or the machine cycle? I do not understand.
Can I try?
Yes, you can.
Okay. So, fetching is the process of getting instruction from the memory in order to be decoded. And decoding is a process of changing data into the language the computer understands back to the language the user understands. After that, feedback is sent out, or it can be stored in the memory again and to be fetched again.
Okay. I do understand now. And what are the components of the CPU?
The components of the CPU are arithmetic or logic unit, control unit, memory, and the processor. The first is the arithmetic logic unit, which performs simple arithmetic and logical operations, meaning any mathematics operations you are performing on the computer. The arithmetic and logical unit is responsible for it. Second is a control unit. This manages the various components of the computer. It reads and interprets instructions from memory and transforms them into a series of signals to activate other parts of the computer. The control unit calls upon the arithmetic logic unit to perform the necessary calculations. That is the cache memory, which serves as high-speed memory, where instructions can be copied to and retrieved. Lastly, it is a processor. A processor determines the speed of the CPU.
So basically, these components do need each other. And I think the memory is the most important in the cycle.
Yes, but why, Frida?
Because data in the cycle needs to be stored before and after. Otherwise, the data will be lost if there was no memory inside the CPU.
Very good, Frida. So to continue the lesson, let's look at what we learned today. We define the CPU of a computer as a piece of hardware that carries out the instructions of a computer program. Every instruction is repeated as a set of 4 basic operations called the machine cycle, which are fetching, decoding, executing, and storing. When we talk of the components of the CPU, which are arithmetic or logic, control unit, memory, and processor. The arithmetic logic unit performs mathematical operations. The control unit, which manages the various components of the computer. The memory, which serves as a high-speed memory where instructions can be copied to and retrieved.
Now I'm going to help my brother with his homework.
And that brings us to the end of today's program. This program was written by Martha Eliasser. And until next time, stay home safe.
This program was brought to you by NAMCOL with funding from the Ministry of Education, Arts and Culture and the Commonwealth of Learning.